In September 1942, Guadalcanal appeared in reports as a trap where the tropical jungle became the enemy's weapon. According to the 1st Marine Division's October report, documents recorded that within 3 weeks, 17 patrol teams had been wiped out, and the division's total casualties for the month were recorded as 400 dead. These numbers were not dry statistics. They marked the pattern of a grim cycle: enter the jungle, lose contact, never return. The difference lay in the operational environment. American soldiers, trained to fight in formation, with disciplined firing lines and concentrated firepower, suddenly faced a battlefield where that discipline became a burden. Japan exploited the jungle's inherent advantages: restricted visibility, sounds that traveled strangely between damp tree trunks, and narrow trails unrecognizable to outsiders. Post-war reports described it plainly but chillingly. The enemy moved like ghosts, appearing at a distance of mere dozens of steps, shooting commanders, then vanishing. The root cause was not a lack of courage or fighting spirit. Tactical analysis indicated that the training methods did not match the real requirements. Patrol teams left base following scripted procedures they had learned, but the jungle did not respond to that script. Intelligence became fragmented. This investigation and those reports revealed that commanding officers often received information late or without actionable details, making enemy prediction tenuous. Frontal attack plans repeatedly resulted in casualties. One commander, speaking at a veteran gathering after the war, under dim lights in the hall, said, "We would send men into places we did not understand," a sentence hanging in the air between sighs and the creaking of chairs. That tactical crisis had 3 clear dimensions. First, poor ground reconnaissance. Isolated patrol teams could not accurately determine enemy positions, firepower, or supply lines. Second, flexibility in local decision-making was limited. The command system required reports before issuing orders, while the jungle demanded immediate decisions at small unit levels. Third, personal equipment and techniques were not optimized for wet conditions, wind, and a moisture-affected range, leading to riflemen being unable to perform as they would on a shooting range. All of this was confirmed in dated action reports, where patrols were trapped in the same type of terrain again and again. From those bloody lessons emerged a defining realization: the existing combat model was no longer sufficient. The interim conclusion of the report was clear. There is a need to develop small, flexible, independent units capable of observing and eliminating without being detected. That idea was not philosophical. It was a direct reaction to what the numbers proved. Not more troops, but the right troops applied to the enemy's weak points. It marked a shift from overwhelming numbers thinking to combat effectiveness thinking. In the command room, daylight filtered through the blinds, and a captain recalled the moment he received the news. He was silent longer than the others, hand resting lightly on the inked report. When the spoon touched the cold cream, he froze for a second. The taste of milk felt almost forbidden. A thought that never made it into the minutes, but post-war memories often required such small details to show outsiders what the survivors felt. Micro-reactions like that softened the dryness of the data and helped the listener understand that behind every number was a human who had seen death up close. The direct consequences of the tactical crisis were also evident: a loss of morale, eroded trust in the command line, and mounting pressure forcing leadership to seek alternatives. The central question posed by this section was answered in the same language understood by both officers and soldiers. If the current method of fighting leads to repeated failure, the alternative must be smaller, faster, stealthier, and empowered to make decisions at the point of contact. At that moment, the idea of a reconnaissance sniper unit emerged not as a glamorous initiative but as a matter of survival. From campaign reports to training frameworks, the gap had to be bridged by field experimentation, by people who could read signs, measure distances through tree cover, and shoot without giving away the next shot. The interim conclusion, emphasized in official records, showed a fundamental shift, not more people, but a change in how people are selected and trained. And in that silence, a small idea began to become a solution, about to be tested under the harshest conditions, where failure would be the only lesson waiting if mistakes continued. Lieutenant Colonel William Whaling appeared in the records as an operational response to an identified problem. He did not arrive with a pre-written lesson plan, but with a specific directive: how to suppress the hidden threat in the jungle. According to the 1st Marine Division's operational notes, Whaling had a distinctive personal background, a World War I veteran, and a 1,924 Olympic marksman. That was more than a title. It partly explained his approach, which relied heavily on individual manipulation skills and refined observational abilities. He was allowed to experiment, and that experiment began not by adding weapons but by selecting people. The selection process was meticulously documented. Whaling reviewed service records, prioritizing those with experience in hunting, farming, and living in mountainous forest terrain, ultimately narrowing it down to 43 candidates. In the gathering session, 41 volunteered and 2 withdrew. These numbers are important, as they demonstrate that the goal was not to recruit en masse, but to select individuals with the appropriate skill foundations, those who could read footprints, detect wind direction, and understand how sound travels through the jungle canopy. Making the selection criteria public sets a clear distinction from range-based shooting recruitment, where the skill of firing while stationary was insufficient for jungle survival. The training organized by Whaling was specialized and experimental. Starting in October 1942, it focused on 4 core competencies. First, silent movement, eliminating all sources of noise by wrapping metal objects in cloth, changing how water canteens were carried, and replacing standard boots with softer ones. Whaling measured this with an exercise: walk 200 yards without making a sound. Only those who passed remained. Second, long-distance shooting in humid conditions. He taught how to estimate range using terrain markers, accounting for moth effect on bullet speed and trajectory. After practice, his best shooters were hitting targets accurately at 400 yards using iron sights, a figure acknowledged by command. Third, survival skills, from identifying edible plants to marking secret withdrawal routes. Fourth, independent decision-making training teams of 2 or 3 to operate autonomously, report later rather than wait for prior orders. The initial results were not grand victories, but changes in how information was gathered. Instead of sending large patrols, there were now small, discrete teams capable of deep infiltration and returning with maps of artillery positions, machine gun nests, or supply lines. The key concept here was independent operation. A 2-man team could make decisions at a hotspot without waiting for orders from rear command, something standard procedures of the time did not allow. The first results proved feasibility: more accurate intelligence gathering and a reduction in repeated ambushes. There is a post-war anecdote not usually found in action reports, but revealing of the mindset at the time. A veteran recalled that during a small gathering after training, he set his spoon down beside his coffee cup and fell silent, a simple gesture heavy with meaning. He paused as if the weight of the program had settled on him. That sentence wasn't in the report, but it reflected a human side of the experiment, that these changes were both technical and psychological for the soldiers involved. Whaling's tactical objective was clear and specific. He sought to create a unit that could replace part of the traditional reconnaissance function, operating alongside infantry but not dependent on direct orders, essentially turning intelligence into an active tool. The experiment required 2 things simultaneously: selecting people with the right experience and training them to enable independent decision-making. This altered the operational structure from a top-down command chain to a network of small teams making decisions where the information was. The limitations of the method were acknowledged in the reports. Whaling knew not everyone would be suited, and there was an initial human cost. However, the method provided clear tactical benefits. Commanders noted that reconnaissance data became more accurate, and that operational plans could be adjusted based on real terrain maps rather than speculation. This led to fewer direct assaults with high casualties and opened the way for flanking maneuvers. From a military administration standpoint, Whaling's experiment demonstrated a core principle: when battlefield reality differs from training assumptions, changing people and methods can be faster and more effective than waiting for equipment upgrades. Crucially, Whaling did not create a romantic movement, he reinforced an operational chain, from selection to training to field application, and the initial results were enough for commanders to consider expanding the model. In the jungle, where a single footstep could seal one's fate, a small, skilled, and independent method began to prove its real-world value. Before moving on to the next section, if you haven't hit the share button yet, please do. Your one action helps us spread these forgotten stories of war. The order was issued on the morning of the 13th of October 1942. Lieutenant Colonel William Whaling received direct instructions from the headquarters of the 1st Marine Division: conduct a strategic reconnaissance west of the Matanakaw River, where traditional patrol teams had been wiped out for weeks. According to the Operations Office log, the objective was to locate Japanese artillery positions, machine gun nests, and communication posts before the main offensive begins. It was time to test the theory Whaling had been training for 2 weeks to see whether these jungle hunters could make a difference in real combat. As the sunlight faded through the dense canopy, Whaling divided his force into 4 small teams, each with 2 men, assigned to different zones along the west bank of the Matanakaw. No medics, no extra supplies, just maps, compasses, and the M1903 Springfield rifle. They would move like water, he told his assistant officers, according to an internal memo. Water finds every crack. That line would later be cited in many training documents as the first philosophy of modern reconnaissance warfare. According to the division's action log, the first team left their position at 4. 2 soldiers from Montana, who had hunted deer on the slopes of the Bitterroot Mountains, moved along the riverbank in thick darkness. After 3 hours, they discovered a large artillery position consisting of 4 Type 92 guns, fully camouflaged under palm leaves. They counted approximately 60 Japanese soldiers guarding the site, with artillery shell crates stacked along the riverbank. The sketched map of the site was penciled onto waxed paper, a careful gesture by men who knew that even the sound of torn paper could signal death. The second team advanced into low hills to the south. There, they found a defensive machine gun nest covering the junction of a trail leading to the river. Whaling's notes in his report stated, "Enemy gun emplacements well camouflaged, able to cover river crossings effectively." This data later became the basis for General Alexander Vandergrift's change in attack direction. The third team went further, observing Japanese logistics routes, recording timing, quantities, and directions of food transport. All returned at the designated time. But the fourth team ran into trouble. According to the combat report, at 7, while mapping a trail route, they unexpectedly encountered a Japanese patrol of 5 men. The 2 sides were 50 yards apart. Both froze almost simultaneously, silent for a few seconds. A Japanese soldier looked down, noticed fresh boot prints in the mud, looked up, and a second later, gunfire erupted. A single shot from the American was fired before the enemy could pull the trigger, dropping the target, but the sound shattered the silence. Whistles and shouts rippled outward like waves. Within 30 seconds, the jungle erupted. The report noted. The 2 Marines retreated, pursued for 40 minutes through dense forest until they crossed back into the U.S. defensive perimeter. They returned to camp with minor wounds but carried a complete map of the enemy patrol route. The map and report were delivered to headquarters that afternoon. According to General Vandergrift's field note, the intelligence obtained in a single day equaled what standard patrols failed to gather in 2 months. That statement reflected the value of Whaling's method: fast, precise, and with minimal casualties. This data compelled Vandergrift to change the entire attack plan. Instead of a frontal river assault as originally planned, he ordered infantry units to flank from the west, where Japanese artillery was not yet heavily deployed. The assault began at 6 a.m. on the 6th of October, 1942. Whaling and his reconnaissance group went ahead by 30 minutes, serving as guides. The sun rose, the mist lifted, and the jungle shadows began to reveal the altered contours of the battlefield. From the east, the main infantry units opened fire, while Whaling's scouts had already severed enemy communications by neutralizing 2 radio stations and a group of coordinating officers. One officer wrote in his journal, "The Japanese did not expect ghosts to move in daylight." According to the statistics released after the operation, between October 6 and 9, Japanese forces suffered approximately 750 casualties, while Marine casualties were recorded as 43 dead and 112 wounded, the lowest since the Guadalcanal campaign began. The 1st Marine Division's report, filed in late October, concluded that small autonomous reconnaissance teams significantly reduced overall casualty rates. A former officer recounted years later, at a symposium in Quantico, yellow light cast over a wall hung with old maps. "We started trusting what we could hear and see, not what we were told," he said, his voice rough like the scent of gunpowder. That simple statement reflected the very spirit Whaling had instilled in the unit, the autonomy of the soldier in chaos. When the operation ended, most senior commanders agreed that the reconnaissance model should be maintained and expanded. According to the post-operation evaluation, Whaling's scout teams had supplied intelligence that saved hundreds of lives and reshaped the operational doctrine for future jungle warfare. That success was not a matter of luck, but of boldness in trusting small teams, where each individual had to become a center of decision-making. The night after the operation, one officer wrote in his personal notebook, "The jungle still sounded the same, but now we knew how to listen." Those words did not appear in official reports, but they reflected a profound change in the unit's awareness. The jungle's silence remained, but now the Marines knew how to turn it into an ally. The victory at Matanacao was not just a tactical turning point, but the validation of a doctrine: small, flexible, independent, but effective. And in that evening light, with gun smoke still lingering, William Whaling knew that his test had exceeded the bounds of experimentation. It had become direction, and from there, the history of the United States Marine Corps turned a new page. As the last gunfire at Matanacao faded, reports poured into the 1st Marine Division headquarters. According to the October 1942 operation summary, the effectiveness of William Whaling's reconnaissance teams exceeded expectations. The data gathered during a few days of combat enabled the command to adjust its entire strategy, reduce casualties, and accelerate the offensive. According to the 1st Marine Division combat report, Whaling's scout sniper model had proved decisive in jungle warfare and will be expanded across regiments. That statement marked the first milestone in turning a field idea into a formal training policy across the force. By the end of 1942, a decision was issued. Each Marine regiment would form its own scout, sniper squad, directly under the command of the regimental commander. The headquarters company directive, December 1942, clearly stated that the reconnaissance platoon is to be equipped, trained, and tasked for silent infiltration and independent intelligence gathering. This structure was revolutionary because it delegated authority to smaller units, enabling them to act independently without waiting for centralized orders. The units trained under Whaling's curriculum became key elements in subsequent Pacific campaigns. In early 1943 training sessions, junior officers were introduced to the concept of fieldcraft, the skills of reading terrain, tracking signs, and maintaining absolute silence during movement. They learned to detect patrol paths by the smell of cigarette smoke, to read wind direction by the motion of leaves, and to determine coordinates from partially obscured starlight. These seemingly minor lessons appeared in the Jungle Warfare Manual as direct results of the Guadalcanal experience. Every sound mattered, one passage in the manual stated, and silence itself was a weapon. For Whaling, his greatest success was not the 750 Japanese troops killed during the Matanacao campaign, but in convincing senior leadership of the need for flexible and autonomous forces. What began as a personal initiative became institutionalized within the structure of the United States Marine Corps. By December 1942, the Marine Corps Headquarters report confirmed Whaling's reconnaissance training was adopted as standard for jungle operations. 2 years later, in February 1944, Whaling was awarded the Legion of Merit, a decoration for his contributions to the instruction and expert knowledge of jungle warfare, which contributed immeasurably to Marine Patrol success. The citation emphasized his role as an organizer and tactical thinker, not merely a frontline commander. According to an excerpt from the Marine Corps Gazette, The medal was presented during a modest ceremony at the base in Melbourne, Australia. When the officer awarding the medal said, "For innovation under fire," Whaling simply bowed and replied, "The men did the proving." After leaving Guadalcanal, Whaling went on to command units at Cape Gloucester in 1943 and Okinawa in 1945. According to Pacific Command records, reconnaissance teams in those two campaigns carried out over 120 forward missions and identified more than 40 enemy artillery positions before the main force attacked. These outcomes solidified the position of the scout-sniper doctrine within the entire Marine Corps combat system. From this point forward, reconnaissance doctrine was defined in the 1945 training manual as the art of finding before fighting. A veteran who fought at Okinawa recalled in a 1960 interview at the Chicago Veterans Hall, "We stopped walking in lines. We started moving in thought." That simple statement reflected the profound change Whaling had initiated. The soldier was no longer just a link in a chain of command, but an independent observer and responder within the broader structure. The long-term impact of this doctrine extended beyond the Pacific War. The lessons from Guadalcanal were integrated into the training programs at Quantico and Camp Pendleton. According to Training Bulletin No. 12, 1946, Marine Corps instruction included 3 new modules: silent movement, independent decision-making, and precision marksmanship under pressure. These were the core elements Whaling had established in the jungles of Matanakau. Whaling's thinking also reshaped how the Marine Corps evaluated and classified personnel. Previously, absolute discipline had been the standard, but after this campaign, personnel reports began to emphasize independent responsiveness and situational flexibility. The system began to look for thinkers, not just followers, a military historian noted in a 1982 analysis. This demonstrated that a tactical innovation could drive changes in organizational culture. When Whaling retired in 1954 with the rank of Major General, he left behind more than 2 decades of experience and a complete doctrine. His training notebooks remain archived in the Marine Corps archives, marking the journey from a field experiment to the foundation of modern reconnaissance warfare. A final note in one of his notebooks read, "Doctrine begins when the data stops being questioned." From Guadalcanal to Okinawa, from a few dozen jungle-trained soldiers to thousands formally instructed, Whaling proved that an idea tested in reality could reshape an entire organizational structure. The scout-sniper doctrine was not born in a conference room, but written in sweat and survival odds. And in the silence of those who survived, that doctrine kept evolving, becoming a core part of Marine Corps thinking for the next 8 decades. By 1944, the war had reached a level of intensity that made unconventional decisions seem reasonable. On the 15th of January 1944, Second Lieutenant Frank Tachovsky, a survivor of the Guadalcanal campaign, received orders to form a special reconnaissance unit for the 6th Regiment, stationed at Tarawa, Hawaii. The order was briefly stated in the 6th Marine Regiment Field Memo. Form reconnaissance platoon capable of independent operations under extreme pressure. That directive set the stage for one of the most unusual recruitment efforts in Marine Corps history. Instead of selecting the most disciplined men, Tachovsky went in the opposite direction. He walked into the military stockade where soldiers were held for fighting, drunkenness, sabotage, or insubordination. According to Tachovsky's post-war interview, he believed that among those imprisoned were men who could survive in environments where all rules collapsed. After 3 days of reviewing records, he selected 18 soldiers who had won hand-to-hand fights not punished for weakness, but for being too aggressive. The recruitment sparked intense controversy. The stockade's commanding officer wrote in the record, "Lieutenant Tachovsky seems intent on assembling a gang rather than a platoon." But Tachovsky did not change course. He merged that group with 22 skilled snipers from infantry units, forming a 40-man force, later known by the nickname the 40 Thieves. At their first roll call, he said, "You've already proven you can fight. Now you'll prove you can survive." According to the Marine Corps Base Tarawa, February 1944 training log, the program lasted 3 months, focused on skills not taught in the formal curriculum. They learned how to move silently, strangle sentries with garrote wire, fight with daggers in close quarters, and survive in the jungle for days without resupply. Each drill began with a scenario: you've been left behind, no radio, no map, how do you get back? Here, creativity and instinct mattered more than procedure. Tachovsky believed that the survival instinct was the one skill that could not be drilled into someone by command. In a training note, he wrote, "The difference between training and surviving is that one stops when the whistle blows." Those who had once lived outside the rules were now required to follow a different kind of discipline, the discipline of survival. They learned to read wind direction by the salt on their skin, tell time by the sound of insects, and distinguish real shadows from enemy camouflage by heat signature. Other officers began to take notice when Tachovsky's unit passed the final test. In the tropical terrain of eastern Hawaii, they were dropped into the jungle and tasked with returning to base within 72 hours, carrying no food. The official evaluation recorded, all 40 men returned within 59 hours, some carrying captured goats for food. No one was injured, no one quit. The story spread across the base, and the term 40 Thieves appeared for the first time in an internal bulletin not as a joke, but to describe men who could take whatever they needed to survive. The Special Training Report, April 1944, listed the unit's skill set: accurate sniping at 400 yards, nighttime movement, silent assault, logistical target destruction, and surviving at least 12 days using only natural resources. They were even taught how to make explosives from civilian materials, a detail that made higher command wary. But Tachovsky understood that in the Pacific, where reinforcements were never guaranteed, improvisation meant survival. What made his method different was the mindset. He recruited people for the very mistakes they had made, then turned those mistakes into skills. One soldier from the unit later recalled, "He didn't see criminals, he saw unfinished weapons." That quote was recorded in Voices of the Pacific Recon Units, published in 1958. Under Tachovsky, they were forged not to become role models, but to become silent blades. By May 1944, when the training was complete, according to the 6th Marine Regiment record, the unit was deemed ready for special operations. Officers who witnessed the final review described a feeling of both concern and admiration, because in their eyes, this was no longer a traditionally disciplined unit, it was a group of autonomous, instinct-driven warriors. From among those once imprisoned, Tachovsky had created a reconnaissance team capable of acting without orders, fighting without supervision, and surviving in any condition. As the sun set over Tarawa base, it was said that he walked the line, looking at each scarred face, then said simply, "Next time, you'll fight before anyone else lands." It was both a promise and a warning. The 40 Thieves were now ready, carrying with them the Outliers method, a new discipline born from survival instinct, preparing to enter the battle that would define their legacy on the island of Saipan. On the 15th of June 1944, the sun rose over the ashen waters of the Mariana Islands, and Operation Saipan officially began. The island, spanning 15 square miles, was fortified by the Japanese with 30,000 defending troops, a network of underground tunnels, artillery, and densely packed machine gun positions. According to command estimates, the casualty rate for U.S. landing forces in the first week could reach 70%, a figure recorded in Operation Plan 5644, U.S. Pacific Command. That was the projected cost of gaining control of this land, a critical launching point for the planned assault on the Japanese mainland. Among the thousands of Marines preparing to land, 40 men from the Special Reconnaissance Unit, led by Lieutenant Frank Tachovsky, had a different assignment. They were not tasked with storming the beach or seizing strongholds, but with clearing paths in the dark, penetrating deep into enemy rear lines, destroying firepower sources, and gathering intelligence. According to the after-action report, the 6th Marine Regiment, they were the first unit to set foot on the island before the main assault. Their mission began while 16-inch naval guns were still pounding the western shoreline. On the morning of June 17, Lieutenant Tachovsky received orders from command: destroy the Japanese ammunition depot in the town of Garapan, located about 2 miles north of the landing zone. Intelligence reports indicated the site contained hundreds of tons of artillery shells and explosives, supplying nearly the entire island's defensive artillery network. Tachovsky selected 8 men for the mission, including his best close combat fighters and 2 demolition experts. They departed at 2, carrying a compass, a hand-sketched map, and 3 satchels of plastic TNT explosives. According to the mission log, 40th Recon Unit, the team bypassed 3 patrol lines, crawled through scorched sugarcane fields, and reached the Garapan industrial area by 4:30. The moon was dimmed by clouds, just enough light to move without being exposed. 2 men approached the concrete wall of the ammo depot and found a large ventilation opening just wide enough to insert the explosives. At exactly 4:42, they set a 15-minute timer and withdrew along a drainage ditch. But less than 100 meters from safety, a Japanese sentry spotted movement and shouted an alert. A split-second reaction saved the team. Corporal Roscoe Mullins fired a single shot, and the group bolted into the dense jungle. 3 minutes later, at 4:57, the first explosion shook the entire Garapan area. According to the 2nd Marine Division Intelligence Summary, a chain of detonations continued for 5 minutes, destroying 30% of the Japanese island-wide artillery stockpile. The blast wave spread more than a mile, forcing defensive batteries to cease fire for hours. The entire team returned to base safely, with no casualties. 3 days later, Japanese artillery fire had dropped by over 40% compared to earlier levels. According to the 5th Fleet's firepower report, this decrease enabled U.S. forces to expand the western beachhead within just 24 hours. A staff officer from the 6th Regiment wrote in the official log, "Without the Garapan explosion, the beachhead might have collapsed. What began as a near-suicidal mission, the 40 Thieves turned into one of the most strategically impactful assaults of the entire operation." After Garapan, Tachovsky's unit continued operating deep inside enemy-controlled territory. They scouted supply routes, ambushed radio outposts, and misled Japanese forces through small-scale raids. One sniper team eliminated 14 Japanese soldiers in a single afternoon, then vanished before artillery could respond. According to field accounts, they survived on confiscated canned food, rainwater, and grilled fish from small streams. That survival instinct reflected the philosophy Tachovsky had instilled in them at Tarawa: use whatever's available to keep fighting. However, every victory came with a cost. From the original 40 men, by June 23, only 32 were combat-capable. 3 had been killed, and 5 seriously wounded and evacuated to hospital ships. 2 weeks later, as the operation neared its end, the final count reported 13 casualties, including 4 dead and 9 wounded. Despite the heavy toll, the unit's performance was rated as exceptional under extreme conditions. The operational analysis, Pacific Theater, concluded that Tachovsky's independent raids and reconnaissance reduced enemy artillery pressure, shortened the campaign duration, and lessened U.S. losses. Total Marine casualties on Saipan were nearly 20% lower than projected, thanks in part to the reconnaissance team's intelligence and actions. A staff officer wrote, "They didn't fight by the book, but they made the book obsolete." At the debriefing session held at the Tinian base, Tachovsky reported briefly, "All objectives achieved, morale high, unit effective." His voice was hoarse, his right arm bandaged from shrapnel. His later remark, recorded in the Marine Corps Oral History Project, was, "We were outlaws, but we were theirs." It became the most accurate description of the 40 Thieves, the men born from breaking the rules to save thousands of lives. As night fell over Saipan, the fire from the Garapan depot still smouldered. One soldier wrote in his journal, "The sky looked like it was bleeding, but it was ours now." They had reclaimed that sky with sweat, blood, and raw instinct for survival. From then on, in post-war training manuals, the term 40 Thieves no longer meant lawbreakers. It became a symbol of modern reconnaissance tactics built more on people than on orders. The Saipan campaign ended in strategic victory, but Tachovsky's legacy extended far beyond a single island. According to the Marine Recon Legacy Report 1971, the small, flexible, and autonomous unit model he developed became the foundation for the entire modern U.S. Marine Corps reconnaissance system. And somewhere on the island, among the weeds growing over old ammo pits, perhaps the scent of smoke still lingers from the Garapan depot where 8 soldiers rewrote the lesson on how an outlier team could change the course of war. On the night of the 26th of June 1944, on the island of Saipan, the first signs of a major upheaval began to appear. According to Pacific Intelligence Brief number 47, Marine Corps listening stations detected an unusual surge in Japanese radio traffic, along with numerous prisoner rumors that they were preparing a full-scale attack for honor. A report sent to headquarters at 22 confirmed. More than 3,000 Japanese soldiers were massing on the island's northern flank, preparing for a Banzai charge, the largest recorded suicidal assault of the Pacific Theater. In a small tent by the shoreline, Second Lieutenant Frank Tachovsky received the report and understood that time was running out. He gathered the remaining officers under the flickering light of oil lamps. "If they come with 3,000, they'll break the line unless someone breaks them first," he said, his voice as low as the distant waves. The situation was clear. If the attack was allowed to unfold in order, American forces would be overwhelmed. The only solution was to break the Japanese command structure before the assault began. Tachovsky drafted the plan that same night. He selected 20 men from the fittest remaining members of the 40 Thieves, dividing them into 5 teams of 4, tasked with penetrating deep into the enemy staging area to eliminate commanding officers. According to Mission Order 27/6, they would depart at 0, approach Japanese field command centers, and return before 5:30. He gave the order, "No heroics, just efficiency. Hit the head and the body dies." Night winds from the sea brought the scent of salt, laying a damp sheen over the soldiers' faces. They smeared mud on their skin, secured knives and ammunition, and vanished into the dark. One of them later recalled, "We walked like shadows, no one spoke. The jungle breathed with us." Over the next 3 hours, the 5 teams crept through enemy camps full of sleeping soldiers, lit only by dim oil lamps shining over maps spread across wooden tables. At 2:30, Tachovsky's central team located a large tent, inside which 3 Japanese officers studied a map. A single silenced shot from a Springfield rifle dropped one officer. The others panicked, but before they could react, 2 more shots ended the meeting. To the west, Corporal Mullin's team reached a radio outpost where 2 Japanese lieutenants were relaying orders. Mullins gave the signal, and 2 snipers squeezed their triggers simultaneously. The report stated, "Targets neutralized at 0245, radios intact." Over the next 3 hours, the 5 teams eliminated 17 Japanese officers, including 2 regimental commanders, 3 staff officers, and several subordinates. According to the 6th Marine Regiment after-action report, the entire mission was completed by 5:15, with no injuries, and all teams returned to U.S. lines before dawn. 2 days later, at dawn on the 7th of July 1944, the Banzai assault began. Horns, drums, and cries of "Tenno Heika Banzai" echoed down the hillside. More than 3,000 Japanese soldiers charged toward the American line, but according to the Joint Combat Record, the attack was scattered and disorganized. Japanese units failed to receive assembly orders, and many charge groups were out of sync. Their command structure had been severed by Tachovsky's raid. Instead of a coordinated strike, it became a suicidal flood. On the defensive line, American troops opened fire relentlessly. Artillery and machine guns tore through wave after wave. From 4 to 8, the entire northern slope of Saipan was engulfed in smoke and fire, according to the U.S. Pacific Command Casualty Summary: 2,500 Japanese soldiers were killed in 4 hours. The remainder scattered, fleeing toward Mount Tapochau. The Americans held their ground, with fewer than 400 casualties. One officer described it: "They came like thunder and vanished like rain." As the sun rose, Tachovsky stepped out of the bunker, looking across smoke-streaked cliffs. A war correspondent wrote that he said nothing, just removed his helmet, looked up at the sun, and turned away. According to eyewitnesses, he had stayed by the front line all night, waiting for news of the teams, and only by morning did he know that no one was missing. It was the last time the 40 Thieves operated together as a complete unit. After the operation, the Marine Corps report assessed Tachovsky's mission as decisive and unprecedented. They concluded that the initiative of a small group had changed the outcome of a battle involving thousands. That success became a textbook example in modern combat doctrine, cited in Reconnaissance Doctrine Revision 1946. When command is impossible, initiative becomes command. Later that year, Frank Tachovsky was awarded the Silver Star for extraordinary leadership and valor under extreme conditions. He declined to give a speech at the ceremony, saying only, "They were the ones who earned it." His unit was dissolved after returning to Hawaii in August, its members scattered across other regiments, many never meeting again. But the name 40 Thieves lived on in military memory as a symbol of independence, audacity, and adaptability. According to the Marine Recon Legacy Report, the experiences of Whaling and Tachovsky became the foundation of the U.S. Marine Corps' modern reconnaissance doctrine, emphasizing the principle of small, flexible, autonomous units. That doctrine persisted from World War II through Korea, Vietnam, and even the battlefields of the 21st century. As of December 2023, the Scout Sniper specialty was officially retired, but the principles created by Whaling and Tachovsky still live on in special reconnaissance units. A veteran who had served in the 40 Thieves, interviewed in 1970, said, "We weren't heroes, we were the experiment that worked." That line closed a chapter of history. In the dark before the Banzai attack, 20 men stood between chaos and order, between death and the survival of the entire front. And in that final silence, the war ended, but their legacy continued. Wherever soldiers are taught that sometimes the action of a small group can shift the entire course of war. Have you ever wondered, if it were you in those days in the jungle, amid artillery shaking the earth, standing at the edge of life and death, what would you have done? Could you have stayed calm like the soldiers at Guadalcanal, or stepped into the darkness like the 40 Thieves on that Saipan night? War is not just maps and numbers, it is memory, breath, and the pulse that still echoes through old field reports. If this story made you pause, made your heart feel heavier thinking about those who lived, who fought, who turned fear into discipline and instinct, give us a follow. A single like won't change history, but it might help keep stories like this from being forgotten. Leave a comment below. Tell me, has your family, your loved ones, or even you ever lived through something like this? Because every memory shared is another piece that helps future generations understand the value of peace. Thank you for walking this journey with us through the jungle battles, the nights by the sea, and the ordinary people who made extraordinary decisions. We'll keep bringing stories like this so when history goes quiet, someone will still be listening. One like, one comment, one memory sometimes. That's the smallest way to make sure those who fell are still remembered.